Small beads are easier. Use the edge of the bevel to keep the first pass straight. Run as many beads as it takes, but try to leave the other side of the bevel for a guide to keep the final pass straight. If you're not limited to a maximum bead width by a welding procedure, you can try a weave bead. Start on one side, letting the puddle flow out to cover the edge of the bevel. Cross the center relatively quick to the other side and hesitate until the puddle flows out and covers the edge. Move the rod up a little, then cross, hesitate, move up, and cross. The upward progress is going to be slow, heating the base metal up more, so turn the amperage down a little. Use the edge of the bevel as a guide to keep the sides of the weld straight. For a smooth weld and straight edges, maintain a uniform arc gap and keep the upward progression tight. When one piece overlaps the other, it's referred to as a lap joint. The edge, and especially the top corner, is going to get hot and melt faster than the surface, where the heat is being dispersed in all directions. You want to fuse the bottom corner while building up a full fillet with a slightly crowned weld bead. Lap joints can be welded all the way with a fast freeze rod, but the filler rods will produce a smoother finished weld. In addition to the metal, the rod angle determines the position of the fillet in the joint. The angle in relation to the weld controls the shape of the bead. Holding the rod perpendicular heats the metal quickly, spreading the puddle for a flatter weld. As the rod is angled back, the weld starts to crown. There are a lot of variables. You have to watch the puddle. With 60-10 or 60-11, hold the rod nearly perpendicular to the weld. With the arc on the leading edge, move the puddle into the bottom corner. Push it up to the top edge and bring the rod around to the leading edge. You may need to speed up or slow down to provide the heat, but always bring the arc back to the leading edge to fuse the corner. Watch the puddle flowing out to the top edge and tying in on the bottom. The fast freeze rods provide excellent penetration, but tend to produce a flat or concave weld. Maintain a constant arc gap for a uniform weld bead, adjusting the travel speed and rod angle so the puddle flows out all the way to the top edge. Because the filler metal remains fluid longer, try running straight without any rod movement, keeping the arc on the leading edge of the puddle. You might be able to get it in 2 passes. The first one smaller and flat, then slowing down to carry more metal and crown the bead on the second pass. It might take 3 or more passes, and on heavy welds, use 70-18 to prevent the bottom beads from cracking. Put the first one in fusing the bottom corner. Chip off all the slag and wire brush the weld. Determine how far out the weld needs to be, and holding the rod straighter up and down, angled slightly back towards the weld, run a bead keeping the outside edge straight. Angle the rod more into the joint and perpendicular to the weld. Then run a second pass filling to the top edge. Angle the rod into the corner with slight adjustments for different thickness metals. Keep the rod nearly perpendicular to the weld. Watch the puddle flowing out to the edge of the lap piece. As long as you keep the filler metal and base metal from overheating, that weld will stay right up there. For vertical down welds, angle the rod up slightly. Carry the heat on the back piece. Move into the corner, pushing the puddle to the edge, then back out. Adjust the travel speed to stay ahead of the puddle and make sure you're on the leading edge of the puddle to move into the corner. You aren't going to build up a lot of weld on a vertical down, so you'll probably need to run a second pass. Carry the heat on the back piece. As soon as the puddle flows out, move into the corner, letting the filler metal flow to the outside edge, even pulling the rod out a little if necessary to maintain a uniform arc gap. Then back into the corner and across, slowing down to let the puddle flow out. Keep the upward progression tight and use a high enough amperage setting so you don't have to wait for the puddle to tie in. If you have any trouble running an uphill fillet with 70-18, try starting out with a 332 diameter welding rod. The smaller puddle is easier to control. This not only provides good penetration, it fills in the corner, making it easier to maintain a uniform arc gap for welding uphill. For heavier metal and more weld buildup, you can either stack weld beads side by side or use a weave bead. The top edge isn't uniform. Hold your grinder flat and skim along the edge to straighten it up. On a T-joint, the top side of the weld is going to require more heat, so angle the rod into the corner to push the puddle up. If the rod is not angled enough to allow that molten pool to flow out to the top, you may leave undercut. With 60-10 or 60-11, always bring the arc back to the leading edge to fuse the corner. Angle the rod to push the puddle up. Watch the top side to avoid undercutting. Flat position, hold the rod nearly perpendicular to the weld, making sure the molten pool is flowing out both on the top and the bottom. Try running straight, maintaining a uniform arc gap and travel speed. If you need a bigger weld, try using a larger diameter welding rod or stacking up weld beads. Overhead is the same as flat. Hold the rod nearly perpendicular to the weld, angled to push the puddle up. Maintain a uniform arc gap and travel speed, not letting the metal or the weld deposit overheat. For more weld, stack beads from the top down.